Deputies Pitman. Jersey corruption. UK government fails constitutional obligations on good governance and the rule of law. Is your press release. What's this all about?
Well, as it says, it's about corruption. Many different strands of corruption. Obviously, we've been through a court case recently. We now know how the Jersey system works for ourselves.
The Jersey judicial system.
The Jersey judicial system. And what we've experienced basically fits in with a lot of complaints now that myself and a couple of colleagues are getting from members of the public. And it clearly sends out the message that Jersey is not monitoring itself. Law appears to be breaking down. And really it's about time the UK fulfilled their obligations to ensure good governance in the island and the rule of law.
Because for those who don't know, you took on Jersey's only newspaper, the Jersey Evening Post. You took them to court.
Yes, we took them to court for a defamation action in which an estate agent published in their paper inferring that it was an advert inferring that we were doing this job for the money, and that's when Trevor...
You were politicians for the money, you were in it for the money?
Yes, and that when Trevor stood for election, he was actually going to get more money than what he was in his previous job as a professional youth worker, when in fact he took a £5,000 pay cut, and he also lost his pension.
But it was a cartoon in the Jersey Evening Post.
Yes.
You tried to do him for libel, defamation.
Defamation.
You lost the case. You lost the case.
Mm-hmm.
That's the way the law goes, isn't it? That's.
Well, I think if we felt that we'd had a fair hearing, that's okay. Nobody wants to lose a case. But then under Article 6 human rights, everyone's entitled to a fair court case, to a fair trial.
But in fairness, libel or defamation cases are notoriously difficult to win. So what is, if you like, different about your case?
Well, look, first you've got to go back to how this started. I'd been elected 2 weeks back in 2008. Now, an estate agent client of the Jersey Evening Post decides to put a huge cartoon in, mocking Shona and myself for apparently taking 4 times the salary, darling. That was the headline, yeah, big smirks on her face. As Shona said, I'd already taken a pay cut of some significance. So you've got to have to ask, what would be the motivation for that to be done? And that's something that's never been actually answered. But once you've taken on a court case, then yes, we'll take a chance like anyone else. But you expect to be faced with a court that's all above board. You don't expect to find jurats sitting on your court case who are personal friends of defendants. And that's what we were to discover later on.
The jurat is a personal friend and so has socialised, as we have proof of it in the letters from the bailiff and the deputy bailiff, with the director of the Jersey Evening Post.
So you'll claim that there's a huge conflict of interest here over the one of the jurats that were allowed to sit on your case. Can you tell us a little bit more?
Well, it's a huge conflict because you can make excuses for Jersey being a small jurisdiction. However, you've got a dozen jurats. There was no need for this to happen. Jurats are meant to recuse themselves if there's any conflict. Now, you would not expect, as I say, to have someone sitting in judgment, and this was a senior jurat, let us remember. There's only 2, and their job is to decide on fact, on evidence. And this is someone who, for years, has been regularly socialising with the longest-serving director of the newspaper, who were the defendants, goes to the director's house. The director goes to their house. How could this happen?
Before we go into talking about appealing, there is another issue that we have with the jurat, and that is his ability to actually be a jurat in the first place. Now, in his previous job, he was a vice principal at Victoria College, and also a friend of Jervis Dykes, who we know was a convicted paedophile for committing child abuse at the college. Now, when investigations were going on, and this is also reported in the Sharp 1999 Sharp report, which is banned by Jersey government, although you can get it on the web. He was reported as saying that he supported his friend Jarvis Dykes, that he should leave the school with dignity. Another thing that also allowed the jurat to stay in post was successive bailiffs, including Sir Philip Balash, who himself, as Attorney General, allowed a paedophile to continue to work in the honorary police.
The Roger Holland affair?
Yes, Roger Holland went on as an honorary policeman to abuse children.
So, I want to get on to some of the headlines, if you like, of your press release. You're saying basically the Law Office Department and the judicial system, if you like, is the tool for choice to silence and if necessary, drive from office and ruin those who dare challenge the established order. Mm-hmm. What's all this? Are you saying? Can you explain some of this to us?
Well, I think when you look at what's happening to us, we're just another example. You know, you've got to look back no further than what happened to former Chief of Police Graham Powell. A completely farcical disciplinary investigation, suspension, which never resulted in any disciplinary charges, convictions, or whatever. Driven from office, you know, a man who was held in the highest regard, decorated by the Queen, and of course, what set it all off? He was investigating child abuse in Jersey, the subject which we know many in the establishment do not want to look at. You've seen the former health minister at the time, who was central to all this becoming public, driven from office, ridiculed in the media, currently being silenced by what most of us consider a blatant abuse of the data protection law in secret hearings in the Royal Court, all paid for out of your pocket and my pocket as taxpayers.
Because there does seem to be a common thread through all this, doesn't there? It is the child abuse because, as we say, the jurat that sat on your case turned a blind eye to a paedophile. Mm-hmm. And as you said, we got the Graham Powell, former chief of police, the former health minister, Stuart Sivray. Yeah. So would you agree that anybody who, because yourselves, both you deputies have been campaigners for the child abuse victims mm-hmm. and for justice, do you see what's happened to you in this particular court case as a means to suppress you, ruin you financially, possibly emotionally, because you've spoken out against the child abuse?
I think it's the child abuse and also being anti-establishment, and we have stood up to establishment, and as I said, you will know, in the past I brought a vote of no confidence against Sir Philip Balash for,
when he was bailiff,
primarily, yes, for him allowing a paedophile to continue working in the honorary police. So I think it's a bit of both there, those who shout out about controversy, and there also seems to be a pattern here of trying to shut those up who are trying to get the truth out about the child abuse. That certainly seems a pattern within government and within the judiciary.
So back on the press release here, we've got legal system / corruption, that you've received complaints mm-hmm. Of allegedly tampering with court transcripts, destruction of and refusal to look at evidence, inconsistency in sentencing, perjury, collusion with lawyers. Where's all this come from? Where's all this evidence come from?
Well, it's a pretty horrifying list, isn't it?
It is a horrifying list, I've got to be honest.
Yeah, and the first thing to point out is that this isn't just cases being brought to me. I'm working with two other politicians, backbenchers. We've got to such a disturbing level of cases, people coming forward, very diverse people, very diverse stories to tell, that we think it can no longer be ignored. So we are actually going to be going public with it in the next 2 or 3 weeks. We're going to try and collate all of this together, all of these stories. And what's the common theme here? It's justice is not being dished out, given, awarded by our justice system. And who's monitoring it?
So you, just so the reader, the viewers can get this properly, you've written to the man who's responsible for the for the justice on this island, Lord McNally.
Yep.
And he's just basically told you can't get involved.
Well, that's right. It's incredible, isn't it? I mean, the UK government does have constitutional responsibility for good governance in the island. We're a Crown dependency. Yet, as Shona said, the absurdity of what he's finished on his letter with, he couldn't intervene because Jersey has its own justice system, but if we liked, he'd refer the matter back to the bailiff, the very man who's allowed the jurat to sit for 14 years, even though he was clearly unsuitable in most people's eyes. The very man who's allowed that jurat to sit on our case when he clearly should have recused himself because of the conflict of his friendship. Where do you go? It's quite absurd. And we'd also point out, wouldn't we, that this isn't just us who's written to the Justice Minister.
No,
we had support.
We're well aware of the letter that we have as a template because other people have received a very similar letter.
So you got a template letter back from the Ministry of Justice, basically.
Oh.
And we waited 7 months for that response.
But the other thing is, we had around a dozen other prominent figures from the island, politicians, other people who campaigned for justice. They all share our concerns about our case and much wider issues. They all wrote in support of us to the UK Justice Minister. Yet he wants to refer it back to the bailiff, the man who's done nothing about all this in the first place.
So
really, we want the UK government to take responsibility of its good governance in the Channel Islands. And as we have already said, that template letter has obviously gone out to other people in Jersey, possibly the Channel Islands, and things, even by that letter, you can tell things aren't being done. And really, we want the UK government to ensure good governance over here, because we haven't got the power. We've got nowhere to go over here, and we now know that the UK government are not doing their job, and we want to push that, not make them do their job, and not only for ourselves but also for islanders who are going through the judicial system.
So it's either Lord McNally, do your what you're obliged to do constitutionally, or be accused of complicity in what looks to be a corrupt and not fit for purpose judicial system in a Crown dependency. Is that?
Well, I'm afraid I'd have to say that our justice system isn't fit for purpose. The evidence is there. I say you bring to attention the people at the very top, the bailiff, nothing's done. You're met with indifference, you're met with excuses, such as in letters from the bailiff and his deputy. Oh, well, everyone said the jurat's a very fair man. You know, Jersey might be a small jurisdiction, but that's no excuse to have a system that doesn't function. If the system isn't working, then you've got to work harder to make sure that it does. Other jurisdictions smaller than us make sure that happens. Now, we're public figures. We've got the chance to voice our concerns to a degree. What about the people like the victims of child abuse? What hope can they have that they're going to get a fair trial and justice if this can happen to us, if this can happen to Graham Power, etc., if this can happen to the former health minister?
Well, what kind of government does it say about Jersey if you've got nowhere to complain and nowhere to go to get justice, and especially if it costs so much money? You know, we've got several lawyers to pay, we're on a decent wage, yet we cannot afford to appeal. What about ordinary people? There's absolutely no chance, and it does seem to be that the system is largely set up to put people off fighting for justice and questioning establishment authorities, etc. And I think the only thing we can do is shout about it, because it's not just about us, it's also about, as I said, islanders, you know.
I think it almost takes you back to the old song, you know, if you tolerate this, then your children will be next, or you'll be next. Where does it end You know, we're seeing this again and again. People who've tried to do something about child abuse are crushed, ruined. They're trying to crush us, they're trying to ruin us. Now, we're both tough people, we're fighters, clearly we wouldn't be in this. But if it happens to us, who's going to be next? Who is going to be next? You know, we've seen the terms of reference, the Committee of Inquiry put off and put off.
The Committee of Inquiry into the child abuse.
Child abuse. You know, that should have been welcomed with open arms if we were a genuine government and justice system. Let's get to the root of this, make sure it never happens again. But as we've seen, obstruction, obstruction, obstruction. Again, you come back to why? Why? And this is, to me, is just another facet of that same problem.
So you're going to keep shouting, and the message is Britain, step in, restore the rule of law in the Crown Dependency of Jersey.
Well, we will fight and we will stand up for other people and for ourselves for as long as we can. How long we can do that, I don't know. But we haven't got a bottomless pit of money. All we've got is the fact that we know we're right. We have a clear case, as do many other people. And we just have to let people know what's going on, you know, because if people want to live in a fair, democratic and just island, then they've got to stand up together, because how the establishment who run this island win is because they divide and conquer. They bully, and if people stand together, they can't be bullied.